All right, Knowles, have we got you?
Hey, here we are.
All right. So, so it used to be an old joke. Is the Pope Catholic? That was like this old joke. But now, now you are Father Michael Knowles, right? You were a priest before, I think, the scandal, right?
My father plays dominoes better than your father plays dominoes. I believe that's how the Latin goes.
You actually speak the ancient tongue of your kind. So, a lot of conservatives have been worried about this Pope. I mean, the Pope says stuff, and conservatives sit and listen to it and say, "Well, wait a minute, that's not Catholic doctrine as I know it." But now there are actual conservative theologians who are attacking him. Have I got the story right?
Well, we do live in a time that has transcended parody. So the question, is the Pope Catholic, is now no longer a joke. It's actually a question raised by dozens of Catholic theologians and priests. So this group of priests and one bishop, though it's important to note the bishop in question here is the bishop of the Society of St. Pius X. This society broke away and was excommunicated by the Vatican 30 years ago. It was recently brought back into communion with the Vatican by Pope Benedict. Okay. They are a little more old school, a little more conservative. They prefer the Latin Mass, as I do. They prefer the traditional liturgy, as I do. The Pope Benedict began a reform of the reform, a kind of reform to the Vatican II changes that gave us all of those god-awful acoustic guitars. And so, but the only bishop that signed on to this was the bishop of SSPX, which has no standing in Rome. The rest, though, were priests and theologians and academics, and they formally accused the Pope of heresy. So fair enough, really? This makes headlines. The reason that they've accused him of heresy is that, in particular, his apostolic exhortation, Amoris Laetitia, the joy of love, seemed by many interpreters to have opened the door for civilly divorced and civilly remarried Catholics to have communion and to loosen the rules about alternative living situations such as cohabitation and all of the stuff that Catholics do but say that they don't do in the United States.
Okay, now a lot of non-Catholics believe that the Pope, when the Catholic Church says the Pope is infallible, that every word out of his mouth is infallible, but that's not right, right? So was this? Yeah,
not at all. Like many things in the Catholic Church, you can't really understand it, and I don't mean that flippantly. I think one of the good arguments for the Catholicity of the Church is that nobody really gets the thing. It isn't a man-made ideology, so when people try to pin it down, it eludes being pinned down. Okay. This letter is worth reading. It's a 25-page letter, and it quotes the First Vatican Council, which defined papal infallibility, and this is what it said. The Holy Spirit was not promised to the successors of Peter that they might, by his revelation, make known some new doctrine, but that by his assistance they might religiously guard and faithfully expound the revelation or deposit of faith transmitted by the apostles. So papal infallibility has only been invoked a handful of times in history when the Pope is speaking ex cathedra to defend religiously some doctrine that's been around forever. It is not invoked when the Pope decides that he fancies one new thing or the other. That doesn't count.
Okay. So they're not attacking him in any place where he's infallible. They're not actually attacking the doctrine of infallibility.
And it's amazing to read this. I think conservatives, even American conservatives, and certainly non-Catholics, really should read the tone of this, because it's called a filial correction. It's a correction as a son writes to his father. It's deeply respectful. It's a real turn. It's a real impressive act to formally accuse somebody of heresy while still being quite respectful. But the piece says you're still the Pope. We believe that you are the Pope. We believe that you're infallible on matters in which you're infallible, but you're misguiding a lot of people. And what this is really about, this is a small group of Catholic theologians. It won't make a blip. But what they refer to here are much more prominent theologians and archbishops, cardinals, bishops, who have sent in letters to the Pope called dubia, saying, this was a little unclear, Papa Francesco. Maybe you ought to clear up what you think about this, that, or the other thing. He has not responded to those things.
So does the Pope have the power to declare that, for instance, cohabitating, living together outside of marriage is now okay? Does he have the power to just change that rule?
The short answer is no.
Okay.
It could be left to theologians to debate whether infallibility could be invoked in some way, but the short answer is absolutely not. It would be a very hard case to make. The Pope can't all of a sudden decide that gay marriage is protected by the church or expounded upon by Christ, or that abortion is just fine. All of these things that I think the left who read Huffington Post headlines believe that is just around the corner for Pope Francis.
Right.
Now, one of the other really interesting aspects of this filial corrective is that it comes in the 500th anniversary of Martin Luther, and half of the letter takes issue with Pope Francis's, quote, unprecedented sympathy for Martin Luther, and in particular on the sacraments. Martin Luther did not have much care for the sacraments, particularly the sacrament of marriage. He said that the sacrament of marriage was simply there to quench the fire of concupiscence, and he was reading St. Paul as he said that. That has never been the position of the Catholic Church, and the fear among conservative theologians and conservative Catholics is that the Pope is taking a Lutheran view.
Wow.
He's allowing Lutherans to accept the Eucharist at Catholic Masses. He's saying very nice things in their churches and about Martin Luther, and they're worried that the sacrament is being watered down and that that rock-steady, incredible, immovable authority of the Church will be watered down, eroded, and left to become some liberal squishiness like all the mainstream Protestant churches.
Well, here's the weird thing. As a non-Catholic, the weird thing about this to me is that I'm watching here in the States, the left has been hammering candidates for judgeships that Trump has appointed because they're Catholic, basically saying, just the very fact that you're Catholic is disqualifying, which is is literally unconstitutional. But they're saying that just the very fact that you're Catholic disqualifies you for being a judge. Is that fair?
Yeah, we pulled this clip. This reminds me of Chesterton, who said that the reason he knew the Catholic Church was legitimate is that it gets attacked for opposite reasons. And all, it's too far left, it's too far right. Do we have this clip of Senator Dianne Feinstein?
Why is it that so many of us on this side have this very uncomfortable feeling that, dogma and law are two different things? And I think whatever a religion is, it has its own dogma. The law is totally different. And I think in your case, Professor, when you read your speeches, the conclusion one draws is that the dogma lives loudly within you. And that's of concern.
Does the dogma live loudly within you? I don't know. It's echoing in my ears.
It's the curious incident of the dogma in the nighttime, where like they expect it not to bark.
An amazing religious test by absolutely empty-headed Senator Dianne Feinstein.
Unbelievable. But it does raise this question, okay? Because a lot of the conservative judges, maybe not all of them, but a lot of the conservative justices on the Supreme Court are, in fact, Catholic.
That's right. It was formerly Scalia, and then Alito.
Right.
Thomas is Catholic. I believe Roberts is Catholic. And then some are nominally Catholic, but are not in a recognizable way.
So we on the right, I think, tend to look a little bit to the Catholic Church to be a stalwart voice for a lot of kinds of conservatism, not all kinds of conservatism. Pope has never been any good on economics. They don't know anything about economics. But on kind of social conservatism, the right kind of looks to the Catholic Church. Is that fair? I mean, where does the Venn diagram of Catholicism and conservatism, where does it intersect?
Absolutely. And I do think Pope John Paul II was, in his own time, quite good on economic matters, only in so much as he opposed communism so vigorously. Yeah. But it is true that the church, it isn't a one-to-one. It isn't a perfect overlap.
Right.
But I don't think it's any coincidence that the founder of the modern American conservative movement, William F. Buckley Jr., was a Catholic. And he was a Shiite Catholic. He was devoutly Catholic. He was Catholic before he was was a conservative even. And his priest in New York pointed out that because Buckley's Catholicism informed his conservatism, it kept his conservatism from being narrow or nostalgic. It kept it from the shallowness that we see in various forms of libertarianism or fiscal conservatism and social liberalism and yada, yada, yada. And it was the French writer Hilaire Belloc said, a man who does not accept the Catholic faith writes himself down as suburban. I think that is what...
When a Frenchman calls you suburban, man, that's just cruel, yeah.
It's pretty brutal.
Yeah.
I think that's why American conservatives look toward and admire the Catholic Church because of that, because it has a depth of conservatism that isn't simply captured by free markets and guns and capitalism and things like that. And I think that's rightly why the left in America fears it.
So one last question, and then I will let you go to prepare your show, because the Michael Knowles show comes on after this, and I know you actually do an occasional bit of work to prepare.
I do it 7 or 8 minutes a day, yeah. Mm-hmm.
As a Catholic and a conservative, when you look at this Pope, who has given, people like me, he kind of gives me a headache. I mean, every time he opens his mouth, I think part of it is the whole South American thing. They've never experienced real capitalism. They've never experienced honest capitalism, so they have perfectly good reasons to hate it. Mm-hmm. But I look at him and he gives me kind of a headache. What is your experience of this Pope?
We've just had 2 of the greatest men in the history of the Church serve as popes consecutively.
Yeah.
we had St. John Paul II and Pope Emeritus Benedict. 2 men who worked together in the same rooms by sheer providence. So by that standard, if he falls a little short, I can understand it. On some issues, he's quite good, and those issues are not, and I'm speaking politically, because he makes political statements. Sometimes he's quite good on matters of social conservatism, and on some matters he can be completely out of left field on matters of environmental regulation or on matters of economics. But a priest once told me that the good Lord sometimes sends us bad popes to remind us that the Pope is fallible, except when he's infallible. And the nice thing is, if this were some Protestant sect or some denomination that doesn't have the weight of history and the weight of glory behind it, then it could turn the whole thing right off the rails. And certainly the Catholic Church has been pulled off the rails before by some of the craziness surrounding Vatican II, which Benedict said was downright Pelagian. It can be pulled off, but because it has the weight of 2 millennia, and because Catholics believe it was instituted by Christ on earth, then we believe it has this spiritual steadiness to it, then it's much harder to move the bark of Peter, and we can survive even the hypothetical not very good Pope.
All right. The semi-infallible Father Michael Knowles will be on the Michael Knowles Show after this. Great to see you, Michael.
I will say, just as a filial corrective to you, Drew, I am infallible on all matters that are not spiritual. So on every other matter, that's where I'm infallible.
Cigars. I'll give you cigars. You're infallible. All right. I'll see you later. Thanks, Michael.